Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Find and Fix Flaky Tests with Test Insights in Extended Debugging. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. I would now like to pass the mic over to Ken Drachnik, Director of Product Marketing for Sauce Labs, who will be introducing the webinar.
Great, thanks, Claire. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on our award-winning test analytics focused on finding and fixing flaky tests. You know, we know that test flake is one of those frustrating test outcomes you have to deal with, and today we're excited to show you a couple of new features that will help you make short work of these test issues. Hi, my name is Ken Drachnik, and I'll be moderating today's sessions, and I have two great saucers with me today who will give you an explanation and demo of these features that we just released. Again, this is a webinar focused mainly on our customers, so this is a hands-on how-to webinar with a pretty good demo here towards the end of it to show you exactly how to identify flaky tests and then how to go and get more networking information on those. Due to privacy concerns, you won't see anyone in the attendees panel, but you can rest assured that we have quite a few people attending today's webinar. And finally, as a reminder, we are recording the webinar today, and we will send out an email with links to the recording and slides in the next couple of days. So I'd like to take this point to introduce two people we have, Lubos Parobek, who is our VP of Product, and Yaroslav Borets, who is our Product Manager for both analytics and platforms here at Sauce Labs. By way of an agenda, we're going to go very quickly through, talk a little bit about introduction about key bottlenecks in the development pipeline, show you how to quickly identify flaky tests using the test insights portion of test analytics, which we just released last week, and then show you how to easily troubleshoot errors and failures and gather networking information with our extended debugging commands. And then we'll do an extensive demo at the end showing you how to do all this. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Lubos and have him delve into the webinar.
Great, Ken. Thanks a bunch. Hello, everyone. I'm going to cover the slides and then hand it over to Yaroslav for the demo. You know, as Ken mentioned, we want to kick things off by just talking about how flaky tests can, really be a bottleneck in the dev pipeline. And when I go out and talk to customers, almost universally, one of the top challenges that they cite in regards to continuous testing is how many problems flaky tests mean for them, and the challenges really kind of divide into a couple different areas. So first, customers often cite that flaky tests reduce confidence in testing, and this is particularly true among the developers on their teams, where if they see tests as being unreliable, they begin questioning why are the teams even writing and executing these tests if they're flaky and unreliable. Flaky tests can also delay releases. Clearly, if you've got a lot of flakiness that you need to go ahead and research, this can mean putting off a release until you're able to verify if the issue that's being raised is real or not. And then finally, in general, because of the identification and troubleshooting required, your overall velocity can be reduced. So clearly an issue for teams. Beyond just the identification of them, troubleshooting both flakiness as well as just general failures can also be quite time consuming. There's a couple different things that drive the amount of time required to troubleshoot. One of those is simply having to do the manual reproduction. You discover an issue, you need to go ahead and set up the test in a similar way and manually reproduce what happened. Unfortunately, sometimes that might not even be possible. As many of the audience may be aware, the timings of an automated test can often be really quickly and can be difficult to reproduce, if not impossible to reproduce in a manual session. So sometimes even the key information just simply might not be available. So these are some of the common things we hear from our customers in terms of how flaky tests can be a bottleneck. So let's go ahead and jump into some data. We wanted to see, within our own Sauce Labs data, how big of an issue is this for our customer? What are some metrics we can put around it? And so what you see on this bar chart basically are the users that took more than 30 minutes to move a test from an errored or a failed state over to a pass state. And so, on the left-hand side, you can see, we had a little bit over 20% of those people could, remediate, that test in 3 hours or less. But then you see that, a bunch of customers over here, close to the same number, that are, taking over 12 hours to take a test and move it from a failed or a errored state over to a pass state. So clearly you can see how this could be something that could delay a release, or at a minimum really reduce your velocity as you're trying to get something to sufficient quality to release. So what are some of the solutions to flaky tests? And we really believe that there are kind of two generic things that everybody needs to do to address flaky tests as part of their process. First, you need a rich historical context, so test trends over time, so that you can really get an idea of which of your tests are flaky versus which of your tests are stable, and when they fail, actually exhibiting real failures. And secondarily, you need really easy and fast access to debugging test data in order to be able to get to the bottom of the issues without having to do time-consuming manual reproduction. And so for the rest of this webinar, we're going to dive into how to use some new Sauce capabilities to do these two things. Number one, to identify a flake through our new test insights feature within analytics, and number two, how to troubleshoot using our new extended debugging functionality. Before we dive into those, though, I want to do a quick poll just to get an idea of how many of you are aware of our test analytics feature and are using it. So let's do the first poll. So the first poll is, how often do you use analytics? And the answers are daily, weekly, monthly, or you haven't had a chance to use it yet. You don't use analytics. So we'll give everyone a few moments here to go ahead and fill that out.
And this is a good time to remind you that most everyone on the webinar is a existing customer of Sauce Labs. So if you have questions about how to use analytics, how to use test trends that's available today, or questions as you go through about the insights, please put those questions in the questions tab, and we'll get to those as we go through the webinar here over the next few minutes.
And nope, looks like we might have some results. Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So it's a pretty diverse group here. So we've got about 65% that don't use analytics. So the good news is we're going to give a quick overview of it next. So that'll be super useful for those folks. And then we've got quite a few people, 22% that are using it weekly, which is pretty good usage, and actually 9 that are using it daily, which is awesome. So great. Let's go ahead and continue with the slides here. So let's see. So quick overview and a reminder of test analytics. So test analytics really helps in a couple different ways, a couple different benefits. First, it provides wide organizational visibility. Secondly, it helps improve efficiency of your teams. And third, it assists with troubleshooting. And so let's go ahead and look at each of these individually. So organizational visibility, this is something that is really provided by our test trends functionality that was introduced about 9 months ago. And it basically allows you to get increased visibility of test coverage and success trends. You can visualize test results across your organization. You can identify failure-prone browsers and platforms. And overall, it allows you to assess release readiness. So let's go ahead and take a look at a quick screenshot that helps illustrate some of these concepts. And so on the top, you see the number of tests that are being run in your organization. You can use a set of filters to look at this by team. You can look at this by browser OS combination. So a really good way for you to tell if your test coverage is where you want it to be. The second chart down shows the pass failure rate. This is a great chart for assessing release readiness. Clearly early in the cycle, you may see a lot of red, and as you get closer to release, you'd expect everything to pretty much turn green. So just a couple examples of how you can use test trends. Improved efficiency is a new capability that we just introduced through our test insights feature set. It enables you to quickly identify a test's root cause failures and reduce time spent on troubleshooting, and it's going to be a focus of our demo today. It allows you to view a test performance over a 30-day time period across key metrics such as error rate, failure rate, and changes in runtime. So, was it fast before, and now is it taking a long time to run? And again, these are metrics on individual tests, right? Versus in test trends, we were looking at kind of a macro view. Here in test insights, we're looking at an individual test and its performance and time. So again, let's go ahead and look at a quick screenshot. And again, this is the key functionality that's gonna help you identify flaky tests because it provides that history of a test that'll indicate whether this is a stable test that all of a sudden ran into an error or failure that might be indicative of a real issue with your app, or is this a flaky test that on a regular basis is showing unpredictable behavior, and therefore it's not really an app issue, it's it's your test that needs to be remediated. And so let's look at a couple things on this page that might be indicative of that. So at the top you can see total runs, and then within those total runs, total errors and total failures. And of course, right away, this along with the metrics beside it, fastest runtime and slowest runtime, will give you some idea of if is Flake an issue here, right? If you see very consistent results, a lot of passes and not a lot of variation in runtime, then you're probably dealing with a fairly stable test. Now, if we go down to the scatter plot, this is where a lot of the insights can really be driven. What you see on the x-axis there is time, and on the y-axis is how long the test takes to run. And then the different colors indicate pass, error, and fail respectively. And now you can imagine if you see all green and all very consistent execution times, you're probably dealing with a stable test. Now, periodically you see the time the test takes to complete spike up. If you see a bunch of errors and failures associated with that spike in time, that's probably indicative of some flake, especially if it's happening on kind of a consistent basis, right? And Yaroslav will get into more details there, but just kind of an indication of how you can use this to quickly kind of narrow in and triage what might be a flaky test and what might not be a flaky test. So this might be a good time. We're gonna we're gonna kind of pivot over to talking about remediating these or troubleshooting these via extended debugging. So I'll pause here and Ken and see if there's any questions about using test insights for identifying flaky tests.
Yeah, I've got one question here. What is the link between execution time and flakiness? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So what I would expect to see here would be, so for example, let's say that you had a backend API that was occasionally for some reason unavailable, right? And so there would probably be some amount of timeout as your kind of test waits for that response to come back in, and then eventually ends up timing out or erroring out. So that might be one of those situations where something takes a long time because it's waiting for a timeout, finally times out because of a backend resource is intermittently unavailable. Right?
There's some kind of network information. There's some kind of lag or delay in the network.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you notice here on the fastest test, it looks like the fastest test was on Chrome, but the slowest test was on Internet Explorer Edge. Is there variations in browsers that might contribute to that difference in time to execute as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you definitely want to be able to use the filters here to kind of narrow things down. And I would say that from a Flake perspective, you probably want to be consistent in terms of what you're looking at. So you probably want to narrow this down to look at let's look at IE or let's look at Chrome and see what the variability is there. You expect there to be some difference natural difference in browsers as they execute. So good question. So that's definitely where the filters can come in and help narrow the results and make sure you're doing an apples-to-apples comparison across the tests.
Right. So now that you've found and can identify, and this is for a single test, right?
Yeah.
So this is for a single test, assuming you haven't changed the test. And now that you've looked at this dashboard and found a single test that looks to be flaky,
Yep.
now you can start looking at using the extended debugging commands to identify those network issues.
Exactly. Yep. And you know, and the first hint of that troubleshooting is really at the very bottom of this page, which is, you know, it starts to let you know, you know, for the ones that you highlight. So you can see the highlighted here are the last three. For those highlighted results, we provide the command where, you know, if it's an error failure, where that error failure happens. So that will be kind of your initial kind of starting point in terms of kind of trying to troubleshoot this. So if there are other questions, let's go ahead and continue. So, actually, right before we go into extended debugging, just wanted to give everyone a sneak peek into what's next for test analytics. So, you know, as we mentioned, Test Trends has been out for about 9 months. We literally just rolled out Test Insights. So if you haven't had a chance to go look and play with that, do that absolutely. Yaroslav will show you where to find it. In Q2, so kind of in the the June timeframe, we'll be rolling out kind of a really exciting new tab called KPI Dashboard, and this is where we're going to be kind of cherry picking key metrics that we think you need to pay attention to. So a good example would be, you know, slowest build, slowest test, browser with the highest failure rate. So we're going to be really looking at, you know, what are the things that we think you should be paying attention to in terms of things that might be slowing you down, bottlenecks in your testing. And then finally, the second half, we're going to kind of double down on test flake detection and root cause analysis. Stay tuned for more details there, but we think there's some interesting work we can do in that area beyond what we're showing you today. All right, extended debugging. Let's go and talk about how we go ahead and troubleshoot and fix these flaky tests once we identify them. Now, extended debugging is also kind of brand new, just went GA, and the main goal here is to speed up root discovery of automated test failures by providing access to browser, console log, and networking data. Today, that's available on Chrome and Firefox on our desktop VMs, and it's coming out soon on Android and iOS. So basically, on all of our virtual devices, you'll have access to these two new debugging resources. And so let's talk about these two resources. So the browser console logs are basically JS console logs that provide a list of errors of JavaScript executed in the browsers. And then the HAR files are, HAR is short for HTTP archive files, and they provide detailed logs of requests and responses that the browser made to the backend during the test execution process. And so both of these can be super useful for go ahead and troubleshooting Flake. A good example is kind of the one that we talked about before, Ken, where there could be some backend resource, some API that is intermittently timing out or failing, and being able to track that down in the context of the other metadata that we provide could be super useful. So you've got the command that failed, you've got the Selenium log that's associated with it, and then now the HAR file as well that can go ahead and help you narrow down what might be causing this particular error. So these two are really the new resources that are available to help you kind of connect the dots in terms of what might be causing that particular test to be unreliable. There's a variety of benefits to having these two additional resources available. Number one is increased release velocity, and this is really being driven by the fact that these new assets are going to be available for every test that runs in an automated fashion. So today you could still get to this stuff, but you have to go manually reproduce that. Go into DevTools in the browser and then see what those requests and responses are, or where that error might be in the JS console log. Now, by adding an additional desired capability that Yaroslav's going to show, you're automatically going to have that. So it's going to really speed up velocity. Also, it's going to save you time because you no longer have to reproduce this stuff locally. It's going to all be right available through Sauce Labs is another asset. And then finally, it's going to all be provided through a single vendor solution. So what we've seen is some customers have set up third-party tools, proxies, et cetera, to be able to go get this information, but that can cause a host of other complexities in your infrastructure. And so simpler is better for sure. And so now you can get all this information directly from Sauce Labs without having to introduce something else into your test infrastructure. And so that actually reminds me that we've got another poll question. So let's go ahead and pop that up. All right, so our next poll question is, how do you get test networking information today to help debug test issues? And the answers are browser mops proxy, Charles proxy, other, or not collecting this information at all. You're just not trying to get this kind of networking information. So let's go ahead and let folks do that. Ken, this would be another great time if you've got any questions about the extended debugging functionality, what we're doing around JS console logs and har files. Great time to ask that in the chat log.
Yeah, I think this is. I think we'll show a lot of the stuff in the wait to demo portion of this. I think the exciting thing about extended debugging is that all this data was, you had to somehow manually go out and get this data and like rerun a test or rerun it a couple of times to manually get that. Yeah. And so what Yaroslav has done has helped release this feature where when you run the test in an automated mode, you automatically collect this with your test or with every test that you do, which really helps understand whether it's flaky and what this networking information is, and gives you a little bit of information around how performant is your app or your test at this point.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we're doing, which is important, is that we're not actually using proxies to get this information. We're actually collecting the data directly from the browsers, and that avoids some of the problems that some of our customers see when they do try to use one of these open source proxy servers. So let's see. So interesting. So we've got about 61% that don't collect the information at all. So big win for all those customers because now they have it available. 13% that are using something else. About 13% that are using Charles proxy, and about 13% that are using browser mop proxy. For the people that are using proxies, for sure check out our solution. As I mentioned, I've had customers that are using browser mop proxy in particular mentioned it was causing issues for them. And they shouldn't see any of those when using the SaaS solution, again, because we're not going through a proxy, we're just grabbing that information directly from the browsers that we're hosting. So super interesting results, thanks. So let's go ahead and continue with the presentation here. Awesome. So again, providing a little sneak peek before we dive into the demo by Yaroslav. So as I mentioned, just recently we introduced extended debugging on Chrome and Firefox. We plan to extend that to emulators and simulators this quarter, so here by the end of March. Then in Q2, kind of taking things in different directions. So we're going to allow the ability to mock up REST API requests and responses. We think there are a variety of super interesting use cases for this. One example could be to be able to test exception behavior in your app. So you may want to validate that if a particular backend service isn't available, that the app fails in a certain way or acts in a certain way. We also see this as an interesting way to speed up your testing. There are particular backend services that you may not want to exercise as part of front-end testing, so you can just stub those out and avoid that kind of backend trip. So again, a way to speed up testing that I know some customers have expressed interest in. So anyway, we're super interested in hearing how you might want to use this. We think there's other use cases and are super curious about how our customers will put this new mock-up capability to use. And then finally, in Q3, we're going to expose the ability within Chrome to actually emulate network behavior. So be able to see what your app looks like at 3G or 4G or Wi-Fi. Be able to simulate kind of higher latency, flaky behavior in the network, and make sure that your app still performs as expected under those kind of real life situations or environments. So that's it in terms of the slide. So let's kind of move into the more exciting part of this, which is the demo portion. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Yaroslav Borets, who's our product manager for both analytics as well as extended debugging.
Thank you, Lubos. Let me jump into this demo really quickly. So before I begin the demo, I wanted to quickly just review what exactly is test analytics and what data it provides, since some of our customers are not using it today. So kind of up until last week, the main page of analytics was this, kind of the trends page that helped customers understand kind of the tests, number of tests their organization was doing, or individual accounts or specific teams, as well as just general pass and fail rate across these tests. Obviously, not everything can be can pass all the time, but if there is an uptick in failures or passes, you can quickly see exactly what's happening and zoom in on those specific tests by just simply kind of using your mouse. But kind of also, if you all of a sudden experience a lot of errors, whether they have to do with tests or just general kind of infrastructure problems, you'll see the spike and description of them here as well. So you can as well quickly zoom in on them. At the bottom of the page, we just simply provide you with a lot more kind of history information, kind of the builds you've run, as well as tests with these builds. And if something fails or passes, you can quickly kind of click on the individual test page and see exactly what's happening. Finally, there's also kind of description of the concurrency utilization. Many of our customers really want to utilize all of our resources, all of the purchase concurrency to the max. And this graph helps them kind of see exactly how effectively their team or overall their individual accounts are utilizing concurrency at the company that the company bought. Now, for all this data here, there are also a set of APIs, and we can provide links to our APIs at the top. So if you want to export this information for later use, or just prefer to store it internally, you have that option as well. Simply follow the documentation link at the top. Now, let me kind of jump into test insights. And the real value that test insights brings is from the fact that kind of now that we believe in this case, there is a bunch of kind of tests that are constantly passing or failing. Kind of how would you go about understanding kind of what are these tests, and how would you kind of, and whether they're actually flaky or true failures? So kind of by clicking on test insights, you can quickly see kind of this page here that provides you a view of a history of individual tests. So in many cases, since kind of many of our customers run thousands and thousands of tests, it's very hard to view kind of the history of individual tests on a single page. And this is exactly what this tool allows. By looking for a specific kind of by searching specific tests, and we'll be integrating this into native dashboard and test details pages. So kind of the searching is going to be optional. You can quickly see exactly how many runs this individual test had, how many failures, errors, what was the fastest, slowest runtime, and kind of quickly zoom in on an individual test and see kind of, okay, so this test, the longest test is in Firefox 57, and the shortest test is in Chrome 62, kind of just as an example. Also, the colors themselves help you identify just flaky behavior. So for example, looking at this kind of part here, you can see that the test has been experiencing consistent flakiness. What it means, the way kind of you can define this is by looking at this chart, and you can see that this test was executed 3 times in a matter of minutes. However, it failed consistently kind of every second time, meaning that there are potential sources for issues. While here, it actually just started consistently failing, meaning there is just problems overall. So if you were to kind of, and now this is where extended debugging helps in. So now that we've identified that this test, in this example, it's called Flaky login test, actually is failing, how would you go about debugging the issue? One way that we suggest our customers do it is by enabling extended debugging. In order to do so, simply in your capabilities, whether this is kind of somewhere where you define the capabilities, put in this string called extended debugging true. And what this means is once the test is executed on Sauce Labs platform with this desired capability across Firefox or Chrome versions, we start capturing additional networking information and console log data for the test and surface it directly on the test details page. So now let me quickly jump in this flaky test and kind of exactly kind of look at the information of when it failed. Now, This is the test. So kind of a very simple test. What it does essentially, it's meant to log into a kind of a form, and in this case, it failed. Kind of after the button was submitted, nothing happened, and kind of again, then the test wasn't able to be completed because kind of, as you can see, there was a login error. In the past, there was not many ways for you to go about kind of reproducing this issue. Considering this is kind of flaky behavior, it's very hard to reproduce flakiness on your own local machine because, again, it's not consistent. There are many things at stake, and possibly even an environment not the same. So this is where extended debugging comes in, and additional logging information. So what we do is, since this test had extended debugging enabled, we have this kind of console log data now added to the log section, where you can see exactly all the URLs loaded on during the test, as well as all the types of errors that were captured while the test was executing. So this test had three kind of JavaScript errors that were captured, and as you can see, the one at the bottom actually says that there was a network error with the logging API. So what this points us to that there was actually a networking error with the logging API itself, not necessarily with the application. Again, it took me a second to identify this without having to reproduce this issue manually. Additionally, on the metadata tab, and also we'll be adding a dedicated viewer later, we have this HAR file captured. So if your application actually captures a lot of kind of metadata with each REST API request, you can download this HAR file. And then currently you have to use kind of a third-party viewer, but it's not going to be the case for much longer. We're working on kind of on embedding one in our UI. You can quickly grab and see exactly what were the kind of the parts of the application that were slow, what were the parts of the application that kind of caused errors. In this case, kind of this JavaScript element never loaded, as well as you can see, the get login itself also failed. So as you can see, we also capture quite a bit of metadata on top of it. So you know, all kinds of headers and kind of agent data. Also, for all the tests that are executed on Chrome, we capture the responses itself. So whether they are generic responses like this, in this case, kind of error, internal server error, or there's something more meaningful that contain quite a bit of debugging information, this also will be captured, and you can download this and process it later for maybe in some kind of automated way. So in summary, not only was I able to identify the source of flakiness fairly quickly, but now I have kind of potential evidence to take to my development team and say, okay, this is a source of evidence. And in many cases, the HAR files themselves will contain kind of links to specific kind of hints that will help the development team identify the kind of point in the logs, or at least area in the logs that will have that will allow them to investigate this further and possibly even resolve the issue. So at the end of the day, what I kind of can do is not only improve my testing speeds by having by removing the unnecessary flakiness from my tests, but also kind of adding additional level of stability to my tests overall and removing this uncertainty and helping overall kind of improve the build lengths, shorten the build length and improve the kind of just overall velocity of every team that's running this test.
And what's cool, this is available now, right? So under analytics,
right.
Everyone should be able to see underneath that analytics tab, the test insights tab, and then they can go to test insights and then search for whatever test they have that they've run repeatedly, and then those results will show up there.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's all kind of, we're trying to integrate this very deeply in our UI and help our customers kind of rely on this information daily.
So this is not data that they can view in like the Jenkins plugin yet. They have to come back to the sauce admin console to actually review the data and look at the HAR files and other metadata here.
Precisely, yeah.
Okay.
So let me just quickly jump in one more example. This is the case of a test that just fails consistently. Kind of, there's nothing kind of unique about it. It just fails consistently. Many cases, maybe this is just nobody it was put in a quarantine or just decided not to be kind of touched. But at the same time, we also there are also tools kind of using the same information, same logs. You can quickly understand the root cause of this failure. So kind of this is a fairly simple test. Just it opens a model and tries to close a model on this kind of on this application. The problem that it runs to is at the end it was not able to close the model. And as you can see, it attempts to do this multiple times at the end of the test. And if you are a developer, there is not much you can do to kind of understand the what is happening here, because everything's kind of visually. There is no feedback. There is no error. There is no any kind of information that displays to you as to what happens. Why is this model not closing? Why is my test keep failing? And you need this additional logs. So yes, you can totally do it manually and click on the button, and that's kind of since the behavior is consistent, you can see it. But since you have console logs on hand available, you can quickly see exactly what's happening. So this test has additional errors, and as you can see, it's got quite a few points of kind of debug information. So as you can see, there is an additional JavaScript error that points directly to a line in JavaScript, as well as column name, is basically where the error is happening, and potentially kind of just the entire stack trace of what can be how can this issue be resolved later on. Again, helping our developers, helping our customers not only identify the root cause of test issue, but potentially have all the evidence on hand without trying to reproduce the issue manually. So, this concludes the way our test analytics and test insights features feed into our extended debugging, and this is how our customers can potentially utilize the additional information to benefit themselves and their organizations. Now, let me quickly go back to the deck. So test insights and extended debugging are available today. As I mentioned, test insights live in this kind of sub-menu under analytics. Click on that and you'll be able to see it immediately. And extended debugging is actually something that can be easily enabled by any of our customers by simply adding additional desired capability to the tests. Again, very simple. Everything's kind of ready to go and ready to be used.
Yeah, and I might add on that test insights, there's some people on here that are not on an enterprise contract plan. Test insights and test analytics are really available to our enterprise customers only today, because that's one of the benefits you get from having one of those accounts. Extended debugging is a desired capability, so that's available to everybody. One of the things on extended debugging, it looks great, right? It's almost too good to be true. Are there any downsides to it, or anything that people need to be aware of when they're using extended debugging command?
Yeah. So the only downside of using extended debugging command today is considering we are connecting directly to the Chrome and Firefox kind of APIs, tests that are heavy, or applications that are heavy on CPU usage, might experience somewhat of a kind of delay in execution speeds, simply because we're just using additional resources from Chrome that were dedicated exclusively to the application. And in many cases, this information might not be that kind of important in every single, like maybe you don't want to have every single test run with this command. But in any case, if you start experiencing flakiness and you really want to understand, kind of have the information on hand when this actually happens next time, enable this for a short time and then disable it once you believe your tests are no longer failing, or at least you know exactly what is the root cause of the issue.
Perfect. We don't have many other questions here, but I think, as people get a chance to explore analytics and try and use debugging, certainly get in touch with us. We'd appreciate some feedback. In the meantime, we have a lot of resources here that you can look at. We've got a solution brief on analytics. We have a data sheet on analytics. We have extensive documentation. I use this at wiki.saucelabs.com, and you can look at a video overview. It's a short video, kind of gives you an intro on test trends and what it looks like, and a demo. And of course, at the end of this webinar, we'll have a recording of this that you can go back and look at and kind of follow what Slav did in terms of adding the command to a test and looking at test insights. All of you should see that test insights underneath the analytics tab on your Sauce Labs dashboard today. That's been rolled out to everyone, right? So if you don't see that, again, you can send an email to us here at Sauce Labs, and we can, the support people can help you understand if there's an issue there. At this point, I think we're out of questions. I think you guys explained everything so well. Thanks for the great demo, Slav. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. This concludes our presentation, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.